Welcome students to a new tutorial series on JSON. Today we are going to be introduced to what it is and also understand more about how we store data in computer science and hopefully appreciate this new strategy called JSON and where it kind of sits in the whole area or field of managing the data that we store in our programs. So let's first think about how we store data in the first place. I'm just going to draw a box. I want you to consider this box as a variable. Inside of it, I could put a piece of information. I could put a number, like the number 3. I could put a character or a string, like the word "ah" or something. I could put any type of information I want, but just one of them inside of this box. That's a variable. However, we've also learned that we can store lots of pieces of data side by side in interconnected ways. Perhaps you want to think about this as an array, or maybe you want to think about one of the fancier types like a list structure in Java or a tuple in Python or some other one of the fancier types of linked lists if you know more about those data structures. And you could even kind of continue to expand your sophistication by adding some multidimensionality to things and creating some two-dimensional structure to store information to be able to maybe make, I don't know, a board game or to replicate some kind of a terrain or an infinite number of real purposes. And so we have these containers that store information and lots of different strategies for the tools that we use to store the data in our programs. Some of them are more simple, like basic arrays. Others are more complex, like lists that we can actually operate methods and behaviors on. But the problem that we kind of come across is any of these forms, whether it's just a single one of these boxes like this, or a whole set of them in a two-dimensional state, or a list, or whatever you prefer, how do we actually get these to be moved into a file and be able to save persistently to the hard drive? You might have used a file writer of some kind to just take the information from these boxes and write it out to a file. So let's say perhaps that you have a file here and you wanted to output, let's come back here for a sec, and just output the phrase, I am ready to learn. That's a nice phrase to consider at the start of a tutorial series. So you'll notice that kind of in the formatting that I have appearing in my beautiful Paint program here, that it separates it into different lines. But let's not worry about the structure on the screen at the moment so much. Let's just worry about the content. I am ready to learn. So if this whole phrase were stored in a single string inside of a variable, I might see it appearing in a file like this. So I output the contents from this red box that contains I am ready to learn as a string, and maybe it just writes to the file like this. Wonderful, no problem. But what if I had split up the words into different variables, into different boxes inside of some kind of extended data structure? Now, when I write it to the file, I still have the exact same structure in my file, and it's not obvious to me. In fact, I don't know at all whether or not this information came from a single variable or if each word came from its own individual variable. I have no ability to kind of know that because that data has been lost. That specificity is gone. And what I could do, and something that you might have tried in the past, is okay, if I want to keep, if each of these are really supposed to be on a separate line, maybe I store that information by some strategy. Perhaps I keep each word on a new line, with each line encoding an entry. Okay, that could work. That is logical, and it would be successful. The problem is that this is a really strange file to read for us humans, and it's a little bit of a, I don't know, not a great organizational strategy. It does work, though. Another option that you could have worked with is think of some kind of something we call a delimiter, where I could have put a comma or some kind of a symbol in between that represents each of these, separates these entries into new boxes. We call this a CSV, comma separated value format. Things like Excel and spreadsheets use this type of formatting right out of the box to be able to separate information. So in an Excel row, this would separate the different cells, and then you go to a new row, and that would go to the same line in Excel. So this is a commonly used format. It functions. It's great, but it has its limitations. And we're starting to kind of run out of options. Just changing things to have a different delimiter, it's kind of the same thing. And there's file formats that use these strategies. You can make it whatever you want. If you wanted to, you could make the separator be some other symbol. But this doesn't, well, notice something. Oops, I typoed one thing there. Notice now that if I use an exclamation mark, now I'm kind of confused by the exclamation mark at the end. So it's kind of like these strategies can function in certain contexts, but to extend them to broader, complex programs, we start to hit some limitations and some problems. So we need a better solution to be able to move from our program contents to what's stored in a file that maximally retains information about how things are organized and categorized while still being readable and sensible. And over the years, there's been many different approaches to trying to solve this problem. And you might have heard of XML, that's an older standard. There's plenty of other standards that you could follow, but the most popular and the most common one that we'll come across is something called JSON. So we are now going to dive into that to try to be able to understand it more thoroughly. So, what is JSON? It stands for JavaScript Object Notation. JavaScript being another coding language that you may or may not be familiar with. Let's not worry too much about it right now. That is just the source of the name. And, well, what is JSON's purpose? It's a lightweight data interchange. Let's pause and think about what that means for a minute. A data interchange is this here. And in fact, I'm going to add another piece of information. Also the return of the information. Let's just do this really quick. It's the writing to and reading from files, the interchange, the things moving from one format in our program. Let me just type this here. Inside our program, oops, on this side here. And on this side, if I can extend this a little bit, this would be in the persistent file. Persistent, did I spell that right? Hopefully, as it's recorded on YouTube for all time, my typo. Oh well. So we have from our program to a persistent file somewhere and back again. And we want there to be an interchange that happens between the two to kind of convert one state to another. And so that interchange needs to be managed. And so JSON is a lightweight, meaning it's really easy to use. It's really low memory, really low processing power, which is awesome. And it allows us to format and move things from one file to another for reading and writing of file contents. Beautiful. That's exactly what we want. What a coincidence. A core component of JSON is the ability to enclose content in curly braces to represent them as objects. We can also structure them like arrays by enclosing the whole file in square brackets. This is kind of probably less common that you'll see. We're going to primarily focus on the object representation, but technically it's an option if it's something that you want to explore and consider. And the values inside of these, either objects or array structures, can be this sub list of things: strings, numbers, booleans, null, objects, or arrays. A nice diverse set of data can all be represented in different ways. So rather than just being stuck with new lines or commas to represent information, we have a variety of values that can be distinctly represented, which is awesome. That's really what we're kind of hoping to see in this situation here. So let's try to get a sense of what types of, how we might see a JSON file looking. So we're going to think about this curly bracket idea of an object. And the key of what happens inside of things, inside of these JSON files, is that we have key value pairs, just like in a dictionary, where you might look up the word apple and then find the definition is a famous popular computer type, or maybe a delicious doctor-preventing fruit. Instead of an actual dictionary, we're going to mimic that structure by having an identifier. In this case, it's the string name and a colon. And after the colon, we have the contents of that are associated with this identifier. In this case, let's use the name Alice, a nice famous name inside of computer science. And so we have our first piece of data. This is a string piece of data. Notice we didn't have to state directly its string. The software that we use to work with JSON will be able to automatically recognize and work with this data type. I can also put in maybe information about age, in which case I'd put in an integer. Oh, sorry, I'm getting back into my Java mindset. It's a comma, not a semicolon. Old habits die hard sometimes. Maybe we have a GPA being represented like this. So we can have decimal value. Sorry, an announcement in the background here. And so we have some basic data types: string, integer, and floating point. So notice that each one of our pieces of information entered needs to have some kind of identifier attached to it that labels it. It's the key that connects us to the value. Okay, that's important to kind of note and be aware of. We could also have an array of various data types. Let's say that this person, Alice, had some courses. In this case, maybe they have math and, of course, computer science. And maybe they have English. Always good to have some more English skills. And that would be a way of one identifier, one key, having many values attached to it in an array. So we can actually have some different kind of layers of data where this whole JSON file, let's just close it off right now so you can see how it might end. This whole JSON file can contain many entries, but an entry could also contain many things potentially, which gives us lots of flexibility in being able to work with different contexts of information and be able to kind of encode or interchange the format of lots of variety of information. All right, let's look at a couple more. Is this person a student? True, they are. I could have a Boolean value being stored in a JSON file. Awesome. We could also have things like, does a student have a middle name? Maybe in my program, this is not required, so I could store a null value here. And later on, we'll see how even objects can be stored inside of this. But for now, we're just going to allow this to be the end of the JSON file. So right here, this would be considered a complete JSON file that includes all of the information that might have been saved from a program's, maybe a user profile. The person's name is Alice, their age is 25, and they have all this other information associated with them. And the beautiful thing about JSON is in our program, we might have had a complex object of some kind storing all this information. And rather than having to awkwardly write that information line by line to a file, instead I have this interchange format that will allow me to store the information in a structure that retains all of the nuances of how that information was organized in the program. And one added bonus of JSON is that it's very readable by humans. This is a nice, easy to follow format where we can see individual entries. They're labeled really nicely. The information is clear. Even sub-arrays of information are nice and easy to follow. So it's a beautiful strategy for both being able to retain data from a program while also making it really easy to review and update and work with as a human on the data storage side. So hopefully you're starting to see why JSON is such a popular format and why it's kind of a fundamentally essential thing to know as a computer science student in this day and age. And in our next video, we'll dive into some examples of how to actually get it up and running. I'm going to show you both Python and Java implementations, so dive into the video that connects to your preferred language and your learning pathway, and we will learn how to master JSON in no time.